When I started my bonsai journey, the biggest question I had was how do I develop a thick trunk on trees? So in this video, I'm going to explain the 6 best ways to develop taper in a bonsai tree. I'm going to show you some examples and I'm going to do some demonstrations. So this is a good example. Look how thick that base is. It comes up and then it suddenly tapers in here. And what I've done here is I've chopped off the trunk. This is now healing up and this branch is becoming the new trunk, so we've gone about 50% thinner from there to there. My plan is to do more than just showing you and talking about these principles. I'm going to do an actual trunk chop on this tree today. It's got some nice movement. I've already done one chop at the top, but it's time for a second one. This is where the main trunk was chopped, and this really healthy branch has quickly turned into the new leader and really thickened up. The secret to thickening this branch into a new leader in such a short space of time, not long over a year, is by allowing this to extend. Look at all this growth. Look at all these leaves and how healthy this is. And that's the reason this branch has thickened so quickly. All this effort that's been put into growing this new branch into the new leader is only for this short section about 2 inches long, maybe 3 inches. Because I'm now going to cut this off above this other branch, like that. Having removed all this new growth, this is now the new leader. I've applied a piece of aluminium wire to this new leader, and I hope you get an idea now of the reason why I've done this chop, but also I think if you can see into the future, hopefully you'll be able to see what will happen going forward. I'm going to go through the same procedure of allowing this branch to grow into a healthy new leader, and then in the future it will be chopped here and this will become the new leader. So for now I'm going to point that up to the sky, because that's the most healthy way for trees to grow, with the branches pointing upwards. So this will now become nice and thick, and eventually this will become the final apex of the tree. I started off with a trunk chop because it's the quickest, easiest way of developing a thick trunk and that kind of bonsai effect, and I hope this was a good example for you to get an idea of that. It shortened it down. This will now be left for a couple of years just to grow on. And next on to number 2, which is dealing with the roots and the nabari. So this second method of thickening the trunk on your bonsai is by using roots to widen the very base of the trunk. As you can see with this hazel, these radial roots that go around the tree are really adding that thickness to the base here, which creates the impression of age, and that's what we're going for. This is a tree I potted about 3 days ago. It was from nursery stock, but as you can see, what I've done is I've spread these roots out to try and create that radial spread. And what this will do is over time it will thicken this base of the trunk and create a nice chunky bonsai. That's the plan anyway. Down here amongst my field maples, I've got a goat's willow growing. So I'm just going to pull this up. They literally come up just like weeds. There is a reason why I've showed you me pulling this goat willow up, and it's to do with the roots. In order to create that radial nabari, what we have to do is we remove the tap root. So I'll just wash this off. We can now see the roots, and they're all kind of emanating from one point, but there is a major tap root. It's a bit like a parsnip. So one of the techniques we use is to remove the tap root, and that will now sit, and these roots will become radial. So they'll spread out and we'll get that thickening at the base. Even though this is a tiny tree, it's never too soon to start developing the roots and the nabari. It's not an ideal time of year to be doing this kind of work, but these goat willow, they just grow wild. I've got hundreds of them, they just grow everywhere, so I will try and keep it alive. And in order that those roots can thrive, I will actually remove some of the growth just to give it more of a chance. And if I water that in now, this has got every chance of going on to do well. Now to the third method for creating a thick trunk, and it's called the sacrificial branch. A sacrificial branch tends to be a more advanced technique for more mature trees, so I don't have loads of great examples of this, I'll have to be honest. However, this is a sacrificial branch on this strange cascading oak that I'm growing. I'll bring you in a bit closer. Now this one's coming out very low on the trunk. It's almost coming from the base of the tree. And this is a branch that isn't going to be a part of the final design of this tree. I'm just leaving it to grow to thicken up this section of trunk. So instead of just these two feeding it, I'm going to let this grow on, and you can see how healthy this is. This is going to thicken up into quite a large branch, and I'll just let that keep growing and growing and growing, and then eventually I'll just cut it off down at the base and it'll have really thickened this section up. This tree has got 3 sacrificial branches on it. None of these are going to be in the final design. And sacrificial branches are not just for trees in pots, we can still use them in the ground. And what these are doing here is, the energy from these branches is flowing down and really thickening up this base. So when we go above them, it's far thinner. And that's developing some wonderful taper to this tree. So these will be staying on for at least another couple of years. Before I show you this hazel, there is another goat willow growing in this pot. So it comes up nicely, and even though it's only small, I'm going to do a trunk chop on it. A trunk chop, should I say. And that's added nice movement and taper. And that's what we keep doing. Hopefully you're beginning to get the idea now that it's not just about using one technique to create a thick trunk on your bonsai and taper. We can use multiple techniques at the same time. So this hazel tree has been chopped up here. So I've done a trunk chop last year, I think, or it might have been this spring. And one of these is going to become the new leader. So just to help make the point, I'll just take the top off that. Wow, that's quite tough, that. So this is going to be sort of the new tree. This will probably become the leader, this one up here. But these branches down here, they're not going to be branches on the tree. These are sacrificial branches. And the aim of them, again, as I showed you previously, is to thicken this section. So these will just be allowed to grow on very strongly, and eventually will be cut off, and this will be much thicker, tapering up to the new leader up the top. So yeah, you can use multiple techniques at the same time to achieve the final result. I've just done some work on it off camera because I want this video to be all about developing taper and thickness in the trunk, but just wanted to show you kind of what I've done there. This will be the new leader, and I cleaned this area up, applied some cut paste, and I think this will go on now to be quite a nice stumpy little bonsai. If you're enjoying this video so far, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button. But now on to number 4 on the list, and I think this is the most important of all the tips, and it's planting in the ground. I've got a tree here that I collected earlier this year in spring, and it's been in a pot, and I've got a couple of others of similar size that have been in the ground, and I want to compare the two. I planted these trees a little bit late in the year, if I'm honest, so it wasn't a great time. They'd already come into leaf, but they've survived, they've done great. As you can see, this is growing on okay, it's healthy and it's going to survive. But I want to show you the extensions. This point is critical to growing trunk thickness, and it's the amount of leaves and growth that you get, because that's directly proportional to how thick the trunk grows. This is probably the longest shoot on this tree. It's about what? It's about 5 inches long. It's nice and healthy, it's got some good leaves on it, and there's 2 or 3 of these throughout the plant. This is basically the same plant collected at the same time, maybe slightly thicker, but there's very little in it. And look at the extensions. Look at that. You're talking the best part of 2 foot. They're thicker, they're healthy, they're all over the tree. It's just really growing well. This tree here, I did a major chop on it, and it was really planted as just a bare stump. And this year, look at the extension. These are the best part of, well, they're nearly 3 foot long. They're thick, it's got 3 of them and other shoots, and that's because it's in the ground. One thing you do need to understand with bonsai is that there are drawbacks to planting trees in the ground. It's not just all gravy. This plant has been in a pot for the last 18 months since I bought it at a garden centre. It's growing on nice, it's not really thriving, but because of that, the leaves are small, the growth is small, the internodes are short, so that's the gap between the leaves, and it's developing into a nice sort of small compact tree. If we compare this to some Japanese maples that have been planted in the ground over that same period, you'll see the difference. What we've got here are some Japanese maples that have been in the ground the same sort of time as that previous tree, around 18 months. They're far thicker. Look at the growth they're putting on. Lots of healthy growth, and I've already pruned these back in the spring, you know, so they put on 2 sets of long extension. But the drawback is the leaves are bigger, the internodes are much longer, but all in all, this is a much quicker way to develop a thick trunk. What I've got here are a couple of really good examples of the difference between growing in a pot and growing in the ground. This one, it's not as if it's been grown in a small bonsai pot, but even in a big pot like this, its growth has been really limited compared to this. This oak here was planted as a seedling by my dad a couple of years ago. It's really grown well, and it's not as if it's been just left unchecked. I've done a major chop here, I've removed branches and I've done some wiring, but even with all that happening, it's growing really strongly. This oak here was bought for me by a friend last year, and it's growing great. I did a chop here, and I'm really happy with how it's developing, but it's much, much thinner. It's barely put any growth on in the last 12 months compared to the one in the ground. But the really interesting thing is the leaf size. Just take a look at the difference between this and this. I mean, it's absolutely massive compared, and with leaves this size, it's no wonder it's growing so much bigger and more vigorously. At the bottom of my parents' garden are these 3 gorgeous silver birch trees. No idea how high they are, but they're growing so strongly, and I wanted to show you these to compare them to one of my bonsai trees. I happen to have an approximate age on this tree. I know that my mother planted this around 6 to 7 years ago as a fairly small sapling. In that time, it's put on tons of growth, it's developed this lovely white bark, and it's turned into this majestic tree. I also roughly know the age of this collected birch. They say that roughly the white bark doesn't appear on these trees till they're around 10 years old. So I know this tree is also around 10 years old. So these are a similar age. That's just amazing to me. The reason I wanted to show you these trees is because although this video is about thickening trunks, once we understand why trees thicken, we can then decide whether or not we want to thicken a trunk or not. I don't want this to thicken anymore. I'm happy with this as a slender tree. The reason it never grew originally when I collected it is because it was growing in a location with very little water. It was growing in a almost completely inorganic soil, and it was just kind of hanging on to survival, and that's how I want this to stay. So the last thing I would do with this is plant it in the ground, because I do not want this to explode with growth. Number 5, it's a bit of a cheat in some ways, but it's the easiest of all the methods, and it's by going out and collecting a tree that's already got naturally thick trunk and great taper. So let's take a look at this oak. I collected this tree in the spring of this year, and it's obvious why. It's got absolutely amazing taper at the base, going all the way up. It's got a nice thick trunk. I mean, the work's already done for me, and what I need to do now is just refine and build the branch structure. So this is almost cheating. Of course, everybody doesn't have access to wild collected Yamadori material, but that's not to stop you acquiring trees like this. I got this off Facebook Marketplace. It cost me £50, and it's got some great age, it's got some great taper. I'm going to chop this down, probably around here next year, and develop this into a new bonsai. So, you know, it's available to everybody. And by doing it this way, I'm basically shortcutting years and years of development. Number 6, and this one is one that I've never seen on any of the videos when it talks about developing thick trunk and taper. I've done a lot of research for this video, and this is something a bit different. So I think you're going to enjoy looking at the clump style as a way of developing a thick trunk, and I think it's really is one of the best ways. So let's take a look at this field maple clump style that I put together earlier this year, and I'm going to take the wire off it. As I put this clump style together, I angled the roots that were coming out from each of the individual trees to face outwards. So it's not only thicker here, developing into multiple trunks, it's also got a natural flare. So this almost combines the idea of clump style with the idea of a flared root base and nabari. So as this fuses over time, which it will, it's going to go into these multiple trunks, have a really nice thick chunky base, and it's almost fused. This time next year this will be one solid mass, and this is almost like a cheat way to develop a nice thick trunk. Of all my experimentation this year, and I do loads of different experiments on my trees, these clump styles have turned out the best. They're really fusing really nicely. This is a blackthorn, and just like that previous field maple, the bases are fusing into a nice thick trunk and everything's growing really healthily. So I highly recommend having a go at this. That's the end of my list of the 6 best ways to add thickness and taper to your bonsai trees. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and I look forward to you joining me on my bonsai journey. Have a great day.